discussing her documentary on rape, you right? Gucci heels is a bad look, try Uggs.
We never conclude Israel is plausibly committing genocide. What a liar. Yeah. What a shameless, shameless, shameless liar. It's so wretched. Every single soldier, bar none, is complicit in this genocidal project. There's the Israeli narrative and there's the Palestinian narrative. No, there's not narratives, there's truth. Judge Sebutinde's statement was so stupid and she's so obviously an imbecile that I suspect the other members of the court didn't read her statement. They just rolled their eyes. Oh, Judge Sebutinde, another idiotic dissenting opinion. And they move on.
And that's the president of the court that they're presiding in.
Yes.
And the cup is half full.
She said at one point, on October 7th, several Israelis were killed. She's so stupid. She said the Balfour Declaration was issued to rescue Jews from the Holocaust. This woman is a complete imbecile.
You've described Israel as, quote, a lunatic state, a race supremacist nation, if not a nation of murderers, then a nation of war criminals. Their social solidarity made palpable in Israeli society is at bottom the spirit, the corpse of a death cult.
Professor Chomsky, a very long time ago, he described Nazi Germany as, quote, the most fantastic outburst of collective madness in human history. Germany's still around.
The following conversation is best viewed as a follow-up to the previous conversation I had with Professor Finkelstein, as shown on screen now and also linked in the description box below. In the previous conversation, we largely stuck to the contents of Professor Finkelstein's new book, Gaza's Gravediggers. In the following conversation, we discuss additional details to the topics discussed in the previous conversation, along with additional questions I had for Professor Finkelstein, having myself closely followed both the conflict and Professor Finkelstein's public comments. Occasionally I'll run a voiceover in this video with the aim of adding some context for those who might be new to the topics being discussed and or for those who are yet to listen to our first conversation. The voiceovers shouldn't be seen as a title to the preceding segments, as in many segments we discuss much more than that which is mentioned in the voiceover. Lastly, as always, any and all constructive feedback and criticisms are welcome and encouraged. I hope you benefit from this conversation as I did. Please do subscribe to my channel, click the like button and share this video as it will help me facilitate more conversations like this one. Thank you for your viewership. In the introduction of Professor Finkelstein's book, Gaza's Gravediggers, Professor Finkelstein likens the actions of Hamas on October 7, 2023 to the 1831 slave revolt in South Virginia, America. In the following, we discuss Professor Finkelstein's likening of these two events, along with the related public statements Professor Finkelstein has made.
Nat Turner was born a slave. He lived the life of a slave, and he had every reason to suppose he would die a slave. You only get one chance in life. You get one life. Others, some believe there's an afterlife, but that's...
You're not offending anyone, don't worry.
That's... Even those who believe in an afterlife recognize that this life you get one chance at.
Sure, yeah.
So, given the condition he was born into, languished in, and expected to die in,
right,
a position of utter and total human degradation, and given the fact that in his particular case, he was a very gifted person. He was, by every reckoning, he was a very smart fellow.
But also a religious fanatic.
A religious fanatic.
He was described as, yeah.
Yes, he was a religious fanatic.
Yeah.
I find it very hard to conceive anybody who was born free, going over to Nat Turner and scolding him. It's just a very, not just incongruous image, it's an impossible image. How do you scold with any kind of moral decency, how do you scold him?
Right.
I don't believe it could be done. If you're in court, you're the prosecutor. Nat Turner is the defendant. The defendant takes the witness stand. You, the prosecutor, look at him and say, Nat Turner, aren't you ashamed of what you did? Don't you recognize how awful, terrible, sinful is the act that you committed? You could just imagine in your mind's eye the ironic grin on Nat Turner's face as he replies, "You're scolding me for immoral action? You're scolding me."
But where's the babies saying that? For example, the babies who are butchered. Because this isn't actually just a two-way thing, is it? It's not a slave owner and a slave. There are, let's say, children involved. So.
Yeah.
I'm not trying. It's not in me to condemn either, but I'm just curious as to what you've said here, because what really stood out to me was the quote here from the Working Men's Party. Undoubtedly, they were, and I think you just said a few minutes ago that the action, you wouldn't condemn the people, but the actions, you would condemn.
Well, the quote is interesting.
The quote is saying undoubtedly they were.
Hopefully you'll put the quote up on the screen.
Yeah, I can do that if you want, yeah.
Viewers can read for themselves.
Sure, yeah.
What they say, this was the New York Working Men's Party. They published an editorial after the rebellion, and they said they thought that their only hope of becoming free was to put to death indiscriminately the whole race of those who held them in bondage.
Yeah.
If such were their impressions, were they not justifiable in doing so, namely putting to death indiscriminately the whole race that held them in bondage? And then the Working Men's Party says, undoubtedly they were.
Do you apply that to the Hamas October 7th? Undoubtedly they were. That's my question.
You would have to...
I'm not trying to put you in a corner, sorry.
No, I'm not afraid of being put in a corner. Okay. That's not an issue for me.
Yeah.
You would have to have done what I did, which is to have studied the situation for 15 years. And if you look over here, these are the reports I read. This is Gaza. And to see what was done to those people.
Right, yeah.
And the various endeavors by Hamas to try to reach a state of normalcy, to end the blockade, to even tentatively agree to a resolution of the conflict based on international law, to engage in nonviolent civil resistance, to cooperate with commissions of inquiry, which they knew would condemn them.
Yeah. And we're very harsh on them, you said, I think.
Excuse me?
And you said they were very harsh on them. Yeah. And they knew that.
And they knew that was going to happen.
For the greater good, they were...
some people said they thought that if they ever had to defend their case, they could vindicate themselves.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know, but what I do know is they cooperated with the commissions of inquiry. Israel didn't.
Yeah.
And so, in that context, I don't see that they had any real options.
Yeah, my only comment on that, we'll just move on, just conscious of time as well, is just that I feel like there is a risk of a sort of slippery slope to justifying different, if something was happening 50 years and, like it's impossible to know every single possibility, right? Just for example, like the Nat Turner rebellion, they could have just not killed babies at least.
Right.
So there was an option of kill the babies
yes,
and adults, or just the adults. So
right, well,
where's the line there? I don't know.
Yeah, well, there is no line.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is it worse to kill a baby, an innocent baby, than an innocent adult? I'm not sure. And at what point does an innocent adult's life become less significant than a baby's? Is it 16? Is it 18?
I don't know.
Is it 25? And I do believe, in the case of both Nat Turner and Hamas, that part of their goal was to cause a national crisis.
Right, to bring attention to these situations.
Well, not just the intention, but to make a point that if you continue to treat us this way, don't be shocked by what we do.
Yeah. If I can press you,
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't like to gauge in heroic posturing.
Yeah.
Or to say things like oppressed peoples have the right to engage in violence, which all sounds to me kind of rhetorical and detached from normal human emotions.
Right, yeah.
I'm not going to defend any of the actions. I just said if I were to imagine myself prosecuting Nat Turner, I would find it very difficult. I would find it very difficult to hurl at him with self-righteous rhetoric. What you did was sinful. What you did was criminal. What you did was an outrage against humanity. I would be very, very hard-pressed to indulge in that sort of rhetoric in the face of the condition that he was placed against his will, and certainly against the most minimal standard of justice.
Yeah, okay. Just the last sort of question on that. In a recent interview, not so recent actually, but in, let's say, 8 months ago or something, you said, quote, "I was relieved to find that William Lloyd Garrison, a revered white abolitionist, though admitting to being horror-struck at the actions, he pointedly did not condemn Turner himself." And you went on to say, "I couldn't find it in me to condemn those the actions of those concentration camp victims. I couldn't do it. I admire much of what you do, so just a caveat to what I'm about to say. Might one argue, and I feel like people will argue, that this is potentially some evidence of your bias towards the perpetrators of October 7th. You are, quote, unable to condemn the actions as a starting point. You then stumbled across or went on and found a passage of history that you could that perhaps conveniently fits how you already felt."
Not really conveniently. I was very unclear how I felt.
Yeah.
I had an intuition, a visceral feeling that I would not join the post-October 7 lynch mob.
Right.
It didn't, in light of my reading, my study, my moral sense, it didn't seem right. But I couldn't quite figure out why or how. Why it was wrong to join the lynch mob, and how to reason it through. And that's why I started to read about the Nat Turner Rebellion and looked around to see how the white abolitionists reacted to it. If Garrison had condemned, William Lloyd Garrison, one of the prominent white abolitionists, if Garrison had condemned Nat Turner, it would have made my situation much more difficult for me.
Okay, I'm with you. Yeah, just in that same quote, you referred to them as concentration camp victims, and you use this sort of phraseology a lot in interviews and in writing and so on. Usually, what I find is when you're questioned on that, you usually say, "Look, I'm just quoting those who are relevant. Israeli Jews, for example. Those who would have a bias against the Hamas. Usually you say you're just quoting them, but in this particular statement, I couldn't find it in me to condemn the actions of those concentration camp victims. It sounds to me as if you do find it personally an accurate description of Gaza. It's not simply just quoting others. Is that fair to say?
What I said in the introduction to my book, from the text of which I sent to you, I explicitly say whether or not it's technically accurate. What's most striking is if you go back from 1948 on, during the period of the Egyptian administration of Gaza, straight through after the June 1967 war, straight through to the present, the image that keeps leaping to everybody's mind is of a concentration camp. So there must be something about that situation in Gaza that keeps reminding every person who visits there, every outside observer looking at Gaza, there must be something about that situation that resembles a concentration camp. Otherwise, how do you explain the fact that UN officials who work there, Israelis, over and over again describing Gaza under Egyptian rule as a concentration camp? Then after 67, Americans who go to Gaza describe it as a concentration camp. Israeli academics describe it as a concentration camp. The head of Israel's National Security Council. So how would you explain the recurrence of that image over a sustained period of time, except that there must be something about that reality that strongly, sharply, vividly resembles a concentration camp?
Okay. I don't mean to be insensitive. Do you think your mother would describe it in a similar way, having experienced the horrors of a concentration camp? Not to belittle the horrors of Gaza.
You know what? I can't presume to speak for them.
Right, yeah. Fair enough.
I do believe that if my parents read what I read, even if they didn't read this wall of papers, which is just part, by the way. My room is filled with them too. But had just read my book, Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom, I think they would have concluded that's pretty horrible. And when you consider the fact that my parents endured that reality for about 5 years, the people of Gaza have endured their reality for 75 years. I can't say. I can't say. They might say, Norman, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what it was like. I can't say.
Right. But it's not necessarily far-fetched, then, is kind of what you're saying. It's
I'm saying what
so many people have.
Remember, descriptions of Gaza as a concentration camp begin occurring right after World War II,
Right.
when the reality of the death camps is very much live.
Yeah.
It's not like ancient history. It's like you're talking about 10 years ago. You know, because the statements describing Gaza, the ones I cite in the book, they begin around 1955.
Okay, yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. A large number of them come from the Israelis.
Yeah, yeah.
They're saying Gaza under Nasser was a concentration camp, or Gaza under Egypt.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Nobody disputes the conditions under Israel were 10,000 times worse than under Egypt.
In chapter 1 of Professor Finkelstein's book, titled Rape Fantasies, Professor Finkelstein critiques several reports regarding the allegations of rape and sexual violence leveled at Hamas since October 7, 2023. In our previous conversation, we discussed Professor Finkelstein's criticisms of the UN Commission of Inquiry report. In the following, we discuss Professor Finkelstein's criticisms of the Patten Report. Now, the Patten Report, firstly, though, you mentioned was not investigative in nature.
It's not what I said. She said it. She kept saying that.
Quote, it is in quotation marks here. But nonetheless concluded that there are quote, there are reasonable grounds to believe that sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred. And it purported the reasonable grounds to believe that rape and sexual torture were ongoing. And you go on to write, but how, or state, you go on to, state, but how could it have possibly known this if Israel possessed any evidence that the hostages still in captivity were being raped? Surely it would have broadcast it far and wide. I'm just curious, this might be a bit of a pedantic question, but what sort of evidence would they be, broadcasting far and wide as such?
Judging from what Patten said, she had evidence. She didn't even say reasonable doubt.
Yeah. But they talk about videos and photos and so on.
No, they don't.
Okay, got that wrong.
Of rape?
They don't state that. It's more so, I guess, commentators and more.
There is, the Patten Report was very clear.
Yeah.
They looked at 50 hours of digital footage.
Yeah.
They looked at 5,000 photographs.
Yeah.
There was no evidence of rape.
Yeah.
None.
Was unable to isolate a single image of such action.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Not one. They had no medical forensic evidence of rape. None.
Yeah.
So that to me is a very surprising conclusion.
Okay.
50 hours is not a small number of hours.
Yeah. 2 hours for every hour of the attack.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it was every imaginable kind of digital evidence.
Yeah.
They looked at CCTV. They looked at dash cam. They looked at body cam of the dead militants or militants who were captured. They looked at iPhone pictures. iPhone, nothing.
Yeah.
That's strange. When you talk about as if rapes were, coming
to the right,
to the left of you, they say that the witnesses were hidden and they were watching
at the Nova Festival.
At the Nova Festival.
Yeah.
Nobody thought to take out an iPhone to document it? That's strange.
Is it?
Oh, yeah, it's very strange.
I think if there was a rape going on near me and I don't think I would be taking my iPhone out.
Wait, say that again?
If I was in that situation and there was someone being raped, or gang raped or something, and I'm thinking I might be shot in the head. I don't know if they.
Yeah, but you're in hiding and you're watching it.
But how? You're watching it. I don't.
That's
I thought the witnesses said they heard.
No. The witness said they saw. Some said they heard. Some said they saw.
Okay, I might have missed that then.
No. Some said they saw.
The witnesses said they saw it.
Yes.
Okay.
I found that strange.
Yeah,
when all these Israelis are videotaping on their iPhones the crimes they're committing in Gaza, and not one of these young people thought to take out his or her iPhone in hiding?
There is a slight difference there. One is, you're on the offensive. The other is you're on the defensive.
Yeah, but you're still in the midst of battle.
If you're watching, if you're safe enough to watch, then you can just.
Well, that's how they described themselves. That they were hidden away watching it.
Oh, okay.
How could that be? How could it be not one photograph of these mass rapes and gang rapes?
Yeah.
No CCTV, nothing? That's very odd to me. Not a single image.
Yeah. You mentioned that the mission stated, the Patten mission, Camilla Patten, right? That it adhered to a, quote, survivor-victim-centered approach. And it would, you right here, right? It's not a funny matter, but sometimes I do laugh when I listen to you and read what you write. The mission stated that it adhered to a, quote, survivor-victim-centered approach. And then you write, it would appear that this approach required total suspension of the critical faculty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious, are you taking issue with the specific, quote, victim-centered approach? And if so, does this bear any similarity with criticism some have of the Me Too movement?
I don't know, honestly. I have no idea what a victim-centered approach means. I don't understand these terms. They don't
register.
They don't click for me.
Okay.
They don't register for me. I have no idea what they mean. You have only one centered approach. It's a truth-centered approach.
I guess it's believing the victim.
You don't believe anybody.
As a starting point.
No, you don't believe anybody. I see no reason to believe the victim. I see no reason to believe the alleged perpetrator. The alleged victim or the alleged perpetrator. People lie.
Yeah.
As we know. They lie. And I don't believe in narratives. This thing, like, there's the Israeli narrative and there's the Palestinian narrative. No, there's not narratives. There's truth. Am I supposed to credit the Jewish narrative of Auschwitz alongside with the guards' narrative of Auschwitz? No, sorry. I'm not interested in your narrative, really. If you can show errors.
You can't always prove these things, though.
Yeah, well, you can't prove it, and it's not a fact.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a specific issue with the rape, from what I hear. If it's not been tested straight away, and the perpetrator could just get away with it because there's nothing there to show.
Well, then
and that person has.
I have no idea what the current standards of evidence are for rape. I find it implausible that if rapes are occurring in the dozens, as they put it, Israel, if rapes are occurring in the dozens, I find it very implausible that in 50 hours of digital footage and 5,000 photographs, you do not have, and she used the word sexual violence.
Yeah.
She didn't just say rape. She said there was no digital evidence of sexual violence. I find that very implausible.
Yeah. Sheryl Sandberg, was that the...
Yeah, she was the former chief operating officer of Meta.
Right, okay, but she was the lady who put out the video, Silence After Screams, was it? Screams Before Silence. Yeah. So, discussing her documentary on rape, you write, Gucci heels is a bad look, try Uggs. Yeah. And similarly, at the end of chapter 3, the ICJ's Judge Sebutinde, her dissenting opinion, you write it here as well. Her dissenting opinion is riddled with factual whoppers and legal contortions peddled by Israeli Hasbro and believed by no one except Zion's true believers, in brackets, if even them. I'm not sure this is just mocking these individuals, It's I'm sure the intention is that, but might it come across to a reader that you're mocking, Zion's true believers? And
I am mocking Zion's true believers. Zion's true believers, and at some point in time, they may have been just innocent, insane people.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, they're presiding over a genocide. They're participating in a genocide. They're propagandizing to facilitate the genocide. Those are very serious issues. what they're involved in. Sheryl Sandberg used all of her power and all of her prestige to produce basically a genocide propaganda film. That's a very serious issue. She's an extremely smart woman. She was first in the class in the economics department at Harvard University. That's no small achievement. And she used all of her intelligence, all of her resources, all of her influence to propagate a claim for which there's no evidence. An ugly claim, a claim purposely designed to facilitate a genocide.
So it's a personal comment. It's specifically aimed at those individuals.
At those who are engaged in these sorts of activities, yeah.
Right. In the following, Professor Finkelstein provides an overview of the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, also known as the BDS movement. Professor Finkelstein outlines the movement's origins and its stated goals, along with his own long-standing contentions with the movement. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but previously you'd clashed with the BDS movement over their agnosticism as to Israel's right to self-determination, meaning its legitimacy as a state under the 67 borders. That's correct, isn't it? Is that right?
I've criticized many aspects of the BDS
Was
movement.
that specific?
There were that was for the sake of your listeners, just to clarify
please.
The question that you're asking. BDS was founded in July 2005. It was 1 year exactly after the July 2004 International Court of Justice opinion declaring that the wall Israel was building in the West Bank was illegal under international law. And in the ICJ opinion, there were many statements on legal questions. So, for example, they declared that the settlements Israel was building in the occupied Palestinian territories were illegal under international law. They declared that the Palestinians were a people. They declared that as a people, they had the right to self-determination. They declared that the right of self-determination includes the right to a state. And then they ended their opinion by saying that they look forward to the creation of two states, a Palestinian state side by side with the state of Israel. So that's the law. And BDS starts its campaign 1 year after the ICJ, International Court of Justice opinion. They start their campaign by saying that unless there's a practical grassroots movement to implement the international law as expressed by the ICJ, it'll never happen. So their goal was to achieve, as a practical matter, the legal rights of the Palestinians as expressed in the ICJ opinion. So they say they put forth basically 3 planks to their program. One, under international law, Israel has to end the occupation. 2, Israel has the obligation to grant, to concede, or to grant Palestinians in Israel the equal status with Israeli Jews. Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews have to be equal under the law. And C, that under international law, the Palestinian refugees have the right to return. That's their 3-plank program. And I said on many occasions that so far as I could tell, the legal rights they're demanding for Palestinians are correctly described. Those are their rights.
That's right,
But the very same international law that says Palestinians have the right to self-determination and statehood, that very same body of law says the same for Israel. And that you can't very well claim to be abiding by the law if you ignore the reciprocal rights of Jewish Israelis. So that to me was an untenable position because, as I said on 1,000 occasions, it's as if, and the BDS said they were agnostic on Israel.
That issue, yeah.
And I said it's as if you're crossing a street, there is a green light, an officer attempts to arrest you. You say, but officer, under the law, I have the right to walk at the green. And so the officer ceases his or her attempt to arrest you. But then the next block, you are walking at the red light. And the same officer attempts to arrest you. And the officer says to you, you remember back there you said you have the right under the law to walk at the green? So why are you now walking at the red light? And you reply, well, officer, I'm agnostic on the red.
Right.
You can't be agnostic on the red.
You can't pick and choose. You need to apply it in whole.
Yeah, you can't claim a right.
Right.
But then when a right turns into an obligation, the law has obligations and it has rights. Or as they say, rights and responsibilities. You have a right to walk at the green because you have a responsibility to stop at the red. And so you can't pick and choose. Rights come with responsibilities. Rights come with obligations. And you have the obligation to respect the the Israeli Jewish right to self-determination.
Right. To statehood.
To statehood.
Yeah. A legitimate state.
I would want to, however, point out, not that we're going to get into the nitty-gritty now, but the practices of the BDS leadership strike me as more akin to a cult than to a mass movement where you have a guru, where no dissent is permitted, where if you deviate from the party line of the guru, you're expelled from its ranks and declared a non-person. All that sort of stuff doesn't strike me as being consistent with a democratic mass movement.
Okay, so just on that note of Israel's legitimacy as a state, in recent interviews you've described Israel as, quote, a lunatic state. I'm paraphrasing you throughout, by the way, so do correct me if I'm wrong. A race supremacist nation. And in your new book, you also describe Israel and Israelis as, quote, if not a nation of murderers, then a nation of war criminals. Their social solidarity made palpable in Israeli society is at bottom the spirit, the corpse of a death cult. I feel like I can preempt the answer here, but do you still consider Israel to be a legitimate state? And if so, what bearing does such a description have if it doesn't translate into any, legal consequences or otherwise? It's like you're describing this, but it's kind of like still legitimate,
Well, it's not unlike the Germans and Japanese during World War II. Those were completely, I think Professor Chomsky, a very long time ago, he described Nazi Germany. I may have. No, you said I may have it right here. Let's see if I have it.
We'll play some B-roll if I can get something between.
Let's see if I marked it. I didn't. It's probably somewhere here, but I can't remember. He described Nazi Germany as, quote, the most fantastic outburst of collective madness in human history. Okay? Germany's still around.
Yeah.
There was never an attempt to actually decompose the German state. Japan's record during World War II was
26
easily as
million
bad.
Chinese
About
people.
26 million Chinese were killed. In the most, I was just reading the other day that they used poison gas against the Chinese, the Japanese. But that didn't change the fact limitations were put on Japan and Germany. They were subject to an American, in the case of Germany, a four-power occupation. In the case of Japan, the American occupation for a period of time. But it didn't alter their right to self-determination.
They just require reform. Some level of
Yes,
reform.
they had to be radically reformed. Now, I would say that we may be in a transition period as far as the law. It's hard to say that if you look at, say, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the South Africa presentation at the International Court of Justice, if you look at this body of material, the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, they go back as far as 1948. When they question Israel's legitimacy. South Africa, there is an intermixture of saying we want two states with also saying the wrongness of what's happened reaches back to 1948. So you can say there is now a certain element of ambiguity in the position of some states in the international community as to whether we have to return to 67, two states on the June 67 border, or we need to go back and question whether the creation of two states in 1948 was already a wrong. So I will acknowledge there has been some shifts since October 7th and the ensuing genocide. There have been some shifts in international opinion on this question.
The International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, often abbreviated to the ICC and the ICJ, are two of the highest courts in the world. The ICC is a criminal court which brings cases against individuals for war crimes or crimes against humanity. The ICJ is a court that only deals with nation states or officially recognized countries. In the following, Professor Finkelstein details the recent changes to the individuals working in these two courts.
There is the International Criminal Court. And then there's a separate body called the International Court of Justice. Fatou Bensouda held the highest office in the International Criminal Court. It's the office called Chief Prosecutor. The current Chief Prosecutor, the person who issued the arrest orders for members of Hamas and the State of Israel, is a fellow named Karim Khan. The ICJ, the former president, Joan Donoghue, the individual who alleged that the court did not find Israel was plausibly committing genocide, she stepped down. Her term of office ended in January 2024. She was replaced by a person named Salam Youssef from Lebanon. Salam Youssef of Lebanon recently left the ICJ to become the prime minister of Lebanon. And he was replaced by Julia Sebutinde, who up until that point was the vice president of the court.
Right.
And now she's the president.
On the 29th of December 2023, the state of South Africa brought forward a case to the ICJ. In short, it alleged that the state of Israel is in breach of the Genocide Convention with respect to Israel's statements and actions vis-à-vis Gaza. Israel rejects these allegations. In the following, I asked Professor Finkelstein questions regarding the ICJ and some of its statements, along with sharing some of my personal frustrations with the court.
The court has only a limited mandate here.
Yeah.
It can only address the question of genocide.
Right.
The court is not responsible for war crimes.
Okay.
It's not even responsible for crimes against humanity. It has only one jurisdiction. There is this convention called the 1948 Convention on Genocide, and the court is responsible for arbitrating that convention or enforcing that convention. So it's saying we haven't yet come to the point where a genocide has been proven.
Yeah.
We haven't reached that point.
Sure, yeah.
What we're here today to do is to establish one issue and one issue only. The issue is, are there conditions in Gaza such that by the time we arbitrate this question, there will be nobody left in Gaza? So are there conditions in Gaza such that there's a real possibility of a genocide?
Right.
Remember, they're not debating whether war crimes are occurring or crimes against humanity. Are there conditions in Gaza now such that when we come to arbitrate this case, we will conclude that a genocide is occurring? Nobody is disputing that mass death has occurred.
Yeah, so they're not necessarily addressing that.
No, they're only addressing the question of genocide.
Okay.
So
I just feel like that's just terrible, like a really shit way of, I mean, okay, we're going to make sure you're not all killed or in a large part, but, you know, if 10,000 children die, well, you know, it's just why Sandford, I mean,
because that's the only jurisdiction they have.
Well,
they don't have jurisdiction over war crimes.
Yeah.
They don't have that jurisdiction. Now, that may be very frustrating, and of course it is.
Yeah.
But you could see the glass is half empty or half full. I see it as half full.
Okay.
That this court, despite all the pressures emanating from Israel, its supporters, the United States, Germany, Britain, France, all of Israel's usual allies, despite all the pressures being brought to bear on the court, and despite the fact that the pressures are not only external, there's a German representative on the court, there's a British representative, there's a French representative. The president of the court is an American, Joan Donoghue.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the external pressures and the pressures that must be coming from inside, trying to resist this conclusion, they conclude, notwithstanding all that, that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. And by May, they're saying Israel has no right to launch the offensive in Rafah. So nothing
I don't know that they're saying that, because they're saying they cannot launch it. Yeah, in May. They cannot launch, you know, it's immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah Governorate, which may inflict on the Palestinian group conditions that could bring about its physical destruction in whole and part. That's not saying you can't. That's just saying if, you know, you can't do it to a massive extent, you know, for like a low level of terminology.
Not exactly. I don't want to parse every word.
Yeah.
But they do say the military offensive has to be halted. Because it may. Because it could. But it has to be halted.
I feel like, okay, I'll take that. I mean, I'm not sure, but I'm ignorant on like the legal terms and so on. But I mean, this is also just coming from as I say, I've heard the people who defend, some of these online. I don't want to mention names, but they, as I mentioned earlier, they just say, well, no, they just say the court just reminded us of our obligations, and
the court already decided that based on the information available to it, the possibility of a genocide was significant enough that it warranted the court order for Israel not to launch the offensive.
Okay. On that note, then, you wrote a chapter that was basically devoted to dismantling, one such interpretation. The question of, plausible genocide or plausible right to be protected from genocide. That's right, isn't it? Because the then president,
the president of the court, Joan Donoghue, her term of office ended, I think, at the end of January.
Okay.
She stepped down, and then she went on the BBC program Hard Talk.
Yeah.
And not just backtracked.
Yeah.
She just completely reversed herself. And I said in the book that there can't be any doubt that she's a shameless and a shameful liar.
Yeah.
What she did. And why did she do it? Well, for careerist reasons. She said that, no, we didn't find that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. We just found that the Palestinians plausibly have rights to be protected from genocide. That was complete nonsense. I mean, it was so...
But it's been peddled since.
No, it's been peddled by Look, I couldn't care less if everybody in the world peddled it. Yeah. It's not true. But it's not been widely peddled. The argument was initially made by some British lawyers.
Yeah.
British lawyers for Israel.
Oh, yeah.
And then she adopted it. The United States, apparently, I was told, made some mention of this argument.
Okay.
But otherwise, no. You have to understand, okay, there's a basic fact of law. You can't indicate, that's the terms they use.
Yeah.
You can't indicate provisional measures unless Israel is plausibly in breach of the Genocide Convention.
And you go into real depth in your book on that.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
So if they're indicating provisional measures, it can only be on the basis that they believe Israel is plausibly committing genocide, that Israel is plausibly in breach of the Genocide Convention. Right. So after Donoghue, her term comes to an end, the court meets again in February, it meets again in March, it meets again in May. It keeps indicating provisional measures.
Yeah.
How could it keep indicating provisional measures if Israel wasn't plausibly committing genocide? It made no sense at all. What she said was just a shameless lie. And if I'm wrong, I hope she sues me. I'm serious. I'd love her to sue me for libel. I would love to go to court and let's go through this.
Okay. So I'm with you. Having read the chapter, I'm convinced of, exactly what you said there. And it is really a ridiculous sort of
Every single judge in the court, including the Israeli judge.
Yeah.
And Sebutinde, the dissenting judge. Every single judge in the court agreed on one point. You cannot indicate provisional measures unless you've proven that Israel is plausibly in breach of the Genocide Convention. Every single judge agreed on that point. No controversy whatsoever. And now along comes Joan Donoghue, who indicated provisional measures, who read out the provisional measures and said, no, we never conclude Israel is plausibly committing genocide. What a liar. Yeah. What a shameless, shameless, shameless liar. It's so wretched what these people will do just for a little career move.
So could the court not, following such comments, could the court not, as one united body, come out and clarify such a statement? That would be so easy, and it would have saved your whole chapter.
Totally agree with you. But you see, the problem is one thing you just said.
Yeah.
As a unified group.
Yeah.
The Americans won't do it. The British won't do it. The Germans won't do it.
So this is a fractured organization with a disingenuous leader, and you see the cup as half full.
That was the most remarkable thing about the decision. Yeah. There was only one dissenting vote. That was Sebutinde.
Yeah.
From Uganda.
Yeah.
That was listen. I
don't know why you put.
I said it 100 times.
Value in
I said it 100 times before the court. I said, "This is ridiculous. Can you possibly believe the ICJ is going to conclude that Israel is plausibly committing genocide?" I was totally shocked.
Your prediction was slightly off.
Was totally wrong. I was totally shocked.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just a bit. I don't know why you hold it to such high account, almost, the ICJ.
I don't. The ICJ is not as wretched as the International Criminal Court, the ICC. And in general, when you read their decisions, there is, given the pressures exerted on the court and the pressures exerted by the judges representing certain states, I would say the performance hasn't been bad.
Okay. Just
I mean, I teach the ICJ, and believe me, a lot of things they say just my stomach, my innards are in knots. But at least in this case, they weren't bad.
Okay, just a quick question. So you wrote, quite a chapter on it. I don't know how long exactly it was, but it was a full chapter for a non-reader like me. It took some time to get through, simply on the question of whether it was a plausible genocide or if they had a plausible right to be defended from genocide. It took me 5 hours actually, but I did it in one day.
I think 5 hours is a good time. That was I organized the book so as to go from the more accessible to the least accessible material.
Right.
And the least accessible was that chapter 4 on Joan Donahue.
Accessible meaning who would be willing to read it, type of thing.
Exactly.
The detail, yeah. I did have a bit of a headache by the end of it. But I'm just curious. So you've wrote this chapter on that specific question. Presumably in a few years' time, they'll give it a yes or a no, right? Is your chapter now redundant, or is it? Why did you write it? I guess I'm asking. Will it become redundant, or
why?
Will it become redundant?
I have a very simple answer.
Yeah.
Because it makes me angry.
Okay.
It makes me angry when I see people in high places who are so corrupt, so morally depraved, so driven by the crudest, most vulgar opportunism, and I want to expose them.
Was it personal then, would you say?
Everything I do is personal. It's rage. It's rage at injustice. And the way I express that rage is hopefully in a useful way by arming people with the facts so as they carry on the struggle for a just world. They'll have a firmer, they'll have a weapon.
Yeah.
A weapon.
Yeah.
Of course, everything I write becomes outdated very quickly. If you look behind you on the top shelf, those are all Professor Chomsky's books.
Yeah.
And you know what? None of them will survive. Every single one of those books is addressing a very current situation.
Right.
And it's already forgotten. It's all history.
Okay.
Do you think anybody's going to be interested in that? Those current situations in Central America, in East Timor, and the 1,000 and other very concrete situations? No. Yeah. He made a decision in his life. He produced work of enduring, timeless value, in his study of linguistics and philosophy. And then he produced work that addresses timely situations, but which rapidly become superseded by time.
Right. But that's okay.
He made that decision. I didn't produce anything timeless.
But okay, right. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Okay.
I didn't produce anything. I produced what would be valuable at this particular moment to serve the cause of justice.
Yeah.
And also, as I said, I find personally deeply enraging when people lie like that.
In Chapter 3 of Professor Finkelstein's book titled Free Agent or Foreign Agent, Professor Finkelstein compares and contrasts the statements and voting patterns of Judge Sebutinde to the other judges in the ICJ. In the following segment, I make reference to the Mavi Marmara or Gazan Freedom Flotilla incident. In short, the incident took place in 2010. A flotilla manned by 700 people from a mixture of over 50 countries was carrying 10,000 tons of humanitarian aid and attempting to break Israel's blockade of Gaza. While still in international waters, it was raided by the IDF, resulting in 10 people killed and 29 injured. An ICC case was launched to investigate the incident. The then lead judge, Patten Report, faced some pressures from the other ICC judges who were not happy with their treatment of the case. In the final segment of this conversation, we discuss all of the above and more. You conclude that you believe she's been blackmailed?
No, I think more likely bribed.
Bribed, okay.
I think that the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court.
Yeah, Fatou bin
she, I think, was blackmailed.
Oh, okay, I see.
Sebutinde, I think, was bribed.
Is that difference important to make?
Well, they're both corrupt.
Yeah.
There is a difference, though, you have to recognize.
Yeah.
If you were to, let's say, do Israel's bidding because they were threatening you that they were going to expose the fact that your daughter had an affair and that it would destroy their marriage.
Yeah.
There's a difference between that
and $50 million or whatever.
Or taking $50 million.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point, to be fair, yeah. Okay, I'm curious though. So you mentioned the ICC judge, Fatem bin Suta, who 2010, I think it was. I'm not giving the background again, am I? But you know, the Mavi Marmara Gazan flotilla, where she essentially threw out the case, or she didn't want to deal with it.
She didn't want to deal with it.
But the judges there put pressure on her, and sort of. You'll explain it better than me. They asserted some sort of pressure over this prosecutor.
Well, they did some things. Well, they did all they could. 3 times.
But they had something at their disposal that they could do.
Yes.
And they did some of it.
They did some of it.
Right.
3 times they ordered her to reconsider her decision not to investigate the case.
Yeah.
And 3 times she said, I reconsidered my decision and I reached the same conclusion. And then finally, what's called the pretrial chamber decided that everything she did in the case was wrong.
Yeah.
They devoted 40-something paragraphs to documenting all the errors she made. But then they said, we've exhausted legal remedies.
Right. Given that Judge Sebutinde, the dissenter, and we'll discuss her more so shortly, but I guess starting from the end, going backwards, can the ICJ judges similarly exert any sort of pressure? Because she's a judge and she's presiding over the case now. Might that have any bearing on the outcome?
I don't know exactly how much discretionary power as the president she has.
Right,
I don't know.
That was my question.
Really. Yeah, I don't know. What I do know is there is a very high hurdle, which is you cannot remove a member of the ICJ a member of the ICJ unless every single other member agrees.
Right, okay. Everyone would have to vote
That's
against
correct.
it.
It has to be unanimous. If there are 15 judges, you want to remove one of the 15, all 14 others have to agree.
Right, okay. Okay. Yeah, so, okay, I just wanted to note that. That's interesting. So, you mentioned regarding her dissenting opinion and that she was bribed. And it, as we said, it was a very incoherent kind of statements and votes and so on. If Israel was essentially pushing her to say and vote the way she was, I just find it perplexing that her behavior would be incoherent, as you say. Like, I mean, this is a state with a major backing, major resource. Surely they would either written her dissenting opinion and gave it to her, she would have written it and then they would have approved of it. And we can go through a few of the details, but if they took, if they had bribed someone, surely they would have made it look like somewhat believable and not as ridiculous as you lay out in that chapter. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, I did. If you recall the last paragraph, I said, given how ridiculous this opinion is, how do they think they can get away with it? And I replied, because they always get away with it.
Okay, yeah.
Nobody ever does anything. So, in part, they become sloppy because it's so easy for them. They just lie and lie and lie, and they get away with it. Look at during the Gaza, just during the last 16 months. Do you remember when they said Hamas's command and control center was right beneath Al Shifa Hospital?
I do, unfortunately, yeah.
Right. And then they attacked Al Shifa Hospital.
Numerous times.
And did they find that command and control center?
I did inquire with someone that I know about this. He sent me 3 websites, New York Times and...
Yeah, the Times kept saying it. That's why they get away with it.
Yeah.
So they don't even think there has to be sophisticated. Plus, they had a second aspect. We live in woke times. Julia Sebutinde was being advertised as the first African woman to sit on the court. And that gives you a kind of moral impunity.
Right.
And the same thing with Fatou Bensouda, what happened was the International Criminal Court, from its founding, had only indicted African leaders.
Right, yeah.
So it began to be ridiculed. It was called the ICC, not the International Criminal Court. It was called the International Caucasian Court.
Right.
So they had to cover up for themselves. So they brought on board an African woman. And therefore, they become untouchable. So it was a combination of the sloppiness born of this dizzying success where anything they say, I mean...
I don't know if that's a fair comment. I think unless a large part of the world is just stupid, A
large part of the world hasn't a clue. Not a large part, 99.9%. They haven't a clue what's going on. Judge Sebutinde's statement was so stupid and she's so obviously an imbecile that I suspect the other members of the court didn't read her statement. They just rolled their eyes. Oh, Judge Sebutinde, another idiotic dissenting opinion. And they move on.
And that's the president of the court that they're presiding in.
Yes.
And the cup is half full.
Because as I said, of that kind of immunity that she has, they get away with it. Look what Fatou Bensouda did.
Yeah.
3 times. Yeah. 3 times. The pretrial chamber said, Fatou Bensouda, what you're doing is wrong. And you really have to reconsider it. And the last time, they devoted more than 40 paragraphs to just going through once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the errors she made.
Right, yeah.
All the errors she made.
Yeah.
They said not only has she repeated old errors, she now has new errors. Yeah. Did that stop them? Did that stop her? No. She still closed the case.
So Israel would devote X amount of resource, bribery and whatnot to an individual to carry out a task, but also do it in a pretty shit way where people easily see it's a load of rubbish, but no one cares. Like that's what it sounds like is being said.
I mean, I can name a dozen cases, incidents. Did you forget all the 3D fancy images of that Hamas command and control center under Al Shifa Hospital?
Yeah.
Did anybody call them to account on it? Did anything happen?
Yeah, I mean, their defense was just that, okay, it wasn't quite as sophisticated as we thought, but we did find guns and...
They never made any defense. Sorry,
I heard this from private
they're defenders.
People. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
But
not official.
They made no defense. We just move on.
But what a stupid way of going about it. I mean, you could have at least... I mean, they have such...
I think people get lazy with success.
Really, at that level? You're representing a state that is, you know...
Yes. And there's two aspects to it. One aspect of it, as I said, is laziness born of success. But the second aspect is even the most sophisticated case, there was no case. There was no case to make. When Julia Sebutinde wants to argue in what was called the legal consequences of Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territories, the case that the court heard in July 2024 and ruled that Israel's occupation was illegal. She wants to argue the settlements are legal. Israel has legal title to the West Bank and Gaza. Palestinians aren't a people. They don't have the right to self-determination and statehood. Hey, you could have made a beautiful, elegant defense, and you know what? It would have been as substantive as her defense. Because there's no case to be made.
But those statements that she made, they were deriven or a derivative of what a singular sort of principle that she feels
that Israelis make. They make it insufficient. Well, first of all...
sorry, she said the administrative boundaries of the Mandate of Palestine on May 1948 became the borders of the independent state of Israel. So if that's your starting point, then those comments that you made regarding, you know, the legitimacy...
There's one problem.
There is some coherence there, is what I'm saying, I think.
There's one problem. That has been rejected by the whole international community over and over and over and over and over again. It has no longer any tenability. You can keep repeating it till the cows come home. It's not going to change the reality that the International Court of Justice, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly have all ruled the settlements are illegal under international law, full stop. So however sophisticated her presentation might have been, it wouldn't change the fact.
But it saves face though, at least. At least, like the average, if the whole idea is, I believe you say the idea is of public opinion, right? At least if it's a coherent argument, it's, you know, you might dispute the legal basis and it's ridiculous from a legal standpoint. But people listening might, you know, think, Israel, 1948 became
parts of it,
and it follows coherence. It's a load of rubbish, but it follows coherence. But her dissenting opinion was just, and her voting.
Because there was political calculation involved. She couldn't make it coherent. I agree with you. There were some. I was just looking at it this morning because some editors are helping me out with getting, you know, finding errors.
Right.
And she said at one point that on October 7th, several Israelis were killed.
Several Israelis were killed.
She's so stupid.
I mean, yeah.
And she
How
said,
can you?
she said the Balfour Declaration was issued to rescue Jews from the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I mean, this woman is a complete imbecile. But I think a lot of it is just laziness. First of all, they don't expect that anybody. They don't expect anyone's going to read it.
Why didn't the Israelis give her a slap and tell her, you know, get it together?
I don't even think they read it.
We're in the genocide court.
I don't even think they read it.
You're making stupid statements.
You know how many times the Israelis are caught on utterly false statements and they don't care. I mean, there's a whole collection of compendia of lies Israel has said since October 7th. They're just...
How does it survive then?
Power and the sense of loyalty.
I'll just like to paraphrase some of your comments in recent interviews as well that tie into this ICJ question. You've mentioned, in the case of Israel, you don't need to distinguish between the state from its society. The state accurately reflects Israeli society. What has unfolded in Gaza over the last 16 months was a national project encompassing the whole of Israeli society. Israelis revel, relish, and are euphoric at the unfolding genocide in Gaza. My question here is, if the ICJ does eventually find Israel guilty of the crime of genocide, what bearing, if any, be it legal, moral, political, or otherwise, does the fact that the army that committed the genocide was a civilian army, you know, and sort of given your description of it, you know, that or you know, assertion, if that's the right term to use, that we need not separate the state from the nation? Is the question clear there? I've got one question.
Yes, the question is very clear.
Yeah.
And it's not unlike the question that was posed after World War II. Because, as you know, after World War II, Germany was eventually divided into two states, the Federal Republic of Germany, and which was in the American sphere, and the German Democratic Republic, which was in the Soviet Union sphere. Most of the so-called anti-fascists went to the eastern side.
Right.
So what you had remaining in the Federal Republic of Germany were mostly ex-Nazis.
Right.
Or certainly, they didn't do much to fight the Nazis, and a large number of them were in the Nazi army. They were complicit in the exterminatory endeavors of the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, the Army, the Air Force. So, what do you do with them? If you jail all of them, who is going to run the government?
What if they're responsible for said actions? You know, I mean, you give such a description, you know, I mean,
I don't give the description.
I mean, sorry,
what I do is, I go through those collections of atrocities that are gleefully posted on the social media. I go through the statements made by Israeli officials from the very top to the mayor of the local town. I go through the genocidal songs that are sung with such relish by Israelis. May Gaza burn. May Gaza burn. And it's a very ugly, comprehensive picture which points to only one conclusion. Only one. This is a national undertaking. It's a national project. And what do you do with it in terms of punishment? I think that's a hard question. I think every soldier now who has served in Gaza in the past 16 months has been personally implicated in a genocidal project. Every single soldier, bar none. You were a gear in this machine, you were one more gear in this machinery of death. Everyone is complicit in this genocidal project. There were some who refused to serve.
Very few,
but
though.
you can fit them in this little foyer where you're filming this video.